The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. Tick-tock. Tick-tock. Diana's heart raced with each passing second as she sat behind the wheel of her car, staring at the sleek, glassy skyscraper that housed her husband's office. She had never visited him unannounced before, but something inside her, a mix of curiosity and unease, compelled her to make this unexpected detour. "Everything is fine," she whispered to herself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. But deep down, she wasn't sure. Married for 8 years, Diana had always trusted her husband, Richard. He was the quintessential gentleman, kind, considerate, and fiercely ambitious. Yet lately, something felt off. He had been coming home later than usual, talking less, and avoiding her gaze during dinner. When asked, he simply chalked it up to stress at work, but today, as Diana glanced at the carefully wrapped lunchbox on the passenger seat, she decided she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling anymore. "Let me surprise him," she muttered with a weak smile. "It's just lunch." With that, she grabbed the lunchbox, adjusted her scarf, and stepped out of the car. The January breeze was brisk against her skin, but it was nothing compared to the chill creeping into her heart as she entered the building. Diana's heels clicked against the polished marble floors as she approached the reception desk. The receptionist, a young woman with a warm smile, directed her to the 14th floor. As the elevator doors opened, Diana stepped out and immediately noticed her husband's office at the far end of the hallway. But what stopped her in her tracks was the sight of a stunningly beautiful woman seated at a sleek desk just outside Richard's door. The woman was everything Diana was not. Her dark, cascading curls framed a flawless face, and her fitted blouse and pencil skirt accentuated a figure so curvy it looked like it belonged in a fashion magazine. She exuded confidence, charm, and an air of mystery that Diana found both captivating and intimidating. "Hello," the woman said, her voice smooth as silk. "You must be Mrs. Hart. Richard has mentioned you before." Diana forced a smile. "Yes, I brought him lunch." "Is he in?" "He's on a call," the secretary replied, her crimson lips curving into a polite smile. "But I'll let him know you're here." As the woman picked up the phone, Diana couldn't help but notice the chemistry between the secretary and Richard when he finally emerged from his office. The way her eyes lingered on him for a second too long, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, it was subtle but unmistakable. Suspense and doubts begin. Over the next few days, Diana's mind became a battlefield. She told herself she was overthinking, but the memory of that woman haunted her. She began noticing things she hadn't before: the faint floral perfume on Richard's shirts, the extra care he took in his appearance, the guarded way he answered his phone calls. Was she imagining things, or was there something going on between Richard and his secretary? To get to the truth, Diana decided to dig deeper. She began asking subtle questions, checking his schedule, and even contemplating hiring a private investigator. But just as she thought she was making progress, something happened that flipped her world upside down. Unable to shake off her suspicions, Diana decided to make another unannounced visit to Richard's office. This time, she arrived later in the day, hoping to catch something she wasn't meant to see. As she stepped off the elevator, she was greeted by an eerie silence. The office floor was mostly empty, with employees having left for the day. Only the secretary's desk was still occupied, the soft glow of her desk lamp illuminating her perfectly styled hair. "Oh, Mrs. Hart," the secretary said, startled but quickly recovering. "You're here late. Richard is still in a meeting." Diana's heart sank. "A meeting? At this hour?" "Yes," the secretary said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "He's in the conference room." Diana nodded and walked past her, pretending to believe the lie. Instead of heading to the conference room, she quietly slipped into Richard's office. It was empty, as expected, but something on his desk caught her eye: a small, handwritten note: "Don't forget our dinner tonight. Looking forward to seeing you." M. Diana's stomach churned. Who was M? Her hands trembled as she slipped the note into her purse and left the office, her mind racing with questions. At home, Diana couldn't confront Richard right away. She needed more evidence. Over the next few days, she began watching him closely. He left earlier than usual and returned later. He was unusually protective of his phone, and he seemed distracted, even during their conversations. One evening, while Richard was in the shower, Diana decided to take a bold step. She unlocked his phone using his birthday and scrolled through his messages. Most were work-related, but then she found a thread with someone saved as Maddie. The messages were casual but laced with a familiarity that made Diana's skin crawl. "Thanks for the coffee today. You're a lifesaver," read one message. Another said, "Can't wait for tomorrow." Diana couldn't sleep that night. The name Maddie didn't ring a bell. But something about it felt significant. The next morning, she decided to confront Richard. "Who's Maddie?" She asked over breakfast, her voice calm but firm. Richard looked up, startled. "Maddie? She's my secretary." "Why?" The casual way he said it made Diana's blood boil. "Your secretary? Why didn't you tell me her name before?" "I didn't think it mattered," he said, frowning. "Why are you asking?" Diana decided to test him. "She left a note on your desk about dinner. Care to explain?" Richard's face turned pale. For a moment, she thought he was going to confess, but then he sighed. "Maddie invited me to a team dinner with some clients. I didn't think it was worth mentioning because I didn't go." Diana wanted to believe him, but her gut told her there was more to the story. Determined to uncover the truth, Diana hired a private investigator. She felt guilty for going behind Richard's back, but she needed answers. A week later, the investigator returned with shocking news. Richard had been meeting Maddie outside of work hours, at a coffee shop, a park, even a cozy Italian restaurant. But the kicker? There were no signs of anything romantic. Maddie often brought her laptop, and their conversations seemed strictly professional. Diana was relieved, but then the investigator added something that sent chills down her spine. "Maddie isn't just his secretary," he said. "She's also his ex-girlfriend." Diana felt her world crumble. Richard had never mentioned an ex named Maddie. Why would he hire her? Why keep it a secret? That evening, Diana confronted Richard again, armed with the investigator's report. "You lied to me," she said, holding up the photos. "You've been meeting Maddie behind my back." Richard's face fell. "Diana, I can explain." "Explain what?" "That you're still in love with her." "No," Richard said, his voice rising. "It's not what you think. Maddie came to me for help. She's in trouble." Diana stared at him, confused. "What kind of trouble?" Richard took a deep breath and explained. Maddie was being blackmailed by someone from her past, someone who had compromising information about her. She turned to Richard, the only person she trusted, for help. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to worry you," he said. "I know how this looks, but I swear, there's nothing going on between us." Diana wanted to believe him, but trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. The days following Richard's confession about Maddie were filled with silence and an unspoken tension that seemed to hang in the air. Diana tried to keep her emotions in check, but her mind was a battlefield. She replayed every interaction she had witnessed between Richard and Maddie, dissecting their body language, their words, and the subtle looks they exchanged. Richard, on the other hand, tried to act normal. He went about his day as though nothing had changed, but Diana noticed the guilt in his eyes whenever they crossed paths. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, Diana couldn't take it anymore. "Do you still have feelings for her?" she blurted out. Richard looked up, startled. "What?" "Maddie," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you still love her?" "No," he said firmly, but Diana wasn't convinced. Meanwhile, Maddie was struggling with her own emotions. She had always admired Richard's kindness and professionalism, but being so close to him every day stirred up old feelings she thought she had buried. She knew the boundaries of their relationship, yet there were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when she found herself wondering what could have been if things hadn't ended between them years ago. But Maddie also noticed the way Diana had looked at her during their brief encounters. It wasn't just suspicion, it was pain. And Maddie hated herself for being the source of that pain, even unintentionally. One afternoon, Maddie decided to address the elephant in the room. She knocked on Richard's office door and stepped inside. "Richard, we need to talk," she said. He looked up from his desk, his expression cautious. "About what?" "Your wife," Maddie said bluntly. "She thinks something is going on between us." Richard sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I know. I've tried to explain, but she doesn't believe you," Maddie finished for him. "And I don't blame her." Unable to bear the uncertainty, Diana decided to confront Maddie directly. She showed up at Richard's office one afternoon and asked to speak with her alone. Maddie, though caught off guard, agreed. They sat across from each other in the small break room, the tension between them palpable. "Do you love him?" Diana asked, her voice steady but cold. Maddie hesitated. "I don't know if that's the right question to ask." Diana's eyes narrowed. "Then let me ask it another way. Do you want to be with him?" Maddie took a deep breath. "No. I respect your marriage, Diana. Whatever feelings I may have had for Richard are in the past. I won't let them interfere with your life." Diana studied her, trying to discern the truth. "Then why didn't you tell me about your history with him?" "It wasn't my place," Maddie said softly. "I didn't want to create unnecessary tension. But clearly, I've failed at that." That evening, Diana confronted Richard again. "Why didn't you tell me she was your ex?" Richard sighed, rubbing his temples. "Because it didn't seem relevant. Maddie and I ended things long before I even met you. I didn't want to dredge up old history that didn't matter anymore." "It matters to me," Diana said, her voice breaking. "You've been keeping secrets, Richard. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I never meant to hurt you. I should have been honest from the beginning." "But why didn't you trust me enough to tell me?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. Richard stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Because I was afraid of exactly this. I didn't want you to think there was anything to worry about when there isn't. Maddie is my past, Diana. You are my present and my future." The following week, Maddie handed in her resignation. When Richard asked her why, she simply said, "It's for the best." "You don't have to do this," Richard said. "You're great at your job, and I value having you here." "I appreciate that," Maddie said with a sad smile. "But I don't want to be a source of conflict in your marriage. Diana deserves to feel secure, and I don't want to stand in the way of that." Reluctantly, Richard accepted her decision. Maddie walked out of the office building for the last time, her resignation letter accepted and her belongings packed neatly into a small box. The brisk January air greeted her as she stepped onto the street, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. For years, she had been a cornerstone of Richard's professional life, but now, it was time to carve out her own path. As she walked to her car, memories of her past relationship with Richard surfaced. Their whirlwind romance from years ago had been passionate but short-lived. They had parted ways amicably, knowing their ambitions were taking them in different directions. She had thought those feelings were buried, but working alongside him had stirred something she couldn't quite name. Maddie sighed and shook her head. The past belongs in the past, she whispered to herself. Maddie's departure was a turning point for Diana and Richard. Without her presence, the tension in their marriage began to ease, but the scars remained. They started attending couples therapy to rebuild the trust that had been fractured. Through the sessions, Diana realized that her insecurities weren't just about Maddie, they were rooted in her own fears of inadequacy. And Richard learned the importance of transparency and communication in a marriage. Over time, they began to heal. Diana stopped questioning Richard's every move, and Richard made a conscious effort to include her in all aspects of his life, both personal and professional. Months later, as Diana and Richard celebrated their 9th wedding anniversary, they reflected on how far they had come. Their journey had been rocky, but it had also strengthened their bond. As they raised their glasses in a toast, Diana said, "To trust, honesty, and a future without secrets." Richard smiled and clinked his glass against hers. "To us. Do you think the secretary shouldn't have resigned?" Share your thoughts on the comments section.